you, James. Thanks everybody at the gallery, Christina, Russell, the great art handbook team. It's really been a pleasure working with you. We set this up in a very brief time, and people here did a great job. As you can see, it's quite some heavy lifting that's been done in the last few days. This is not the first show that Franz Gertsch has in New York, actually. There was one at MoMA in 1990 with a series of woodcut. Actually, the very one at the back was in that show at the time. Then there was a show at the Goshen in 2000, I think. So this is the third major appearance of this artist, who is very well known and established in Europe. He just had a show which was at the Museo in Copenhagen, which then traveled to Hamburg, and I think that in Budapest there's the next show is currently being prepared. Franz Gertsch, as you have seen, was born in 1930. He passed away a couple of years ago. When you look at his books and the publication, you will find that he was kind of a late bloomer. So the career that he himself then considered important actually only starts in the early 1970s, when he was roughly 40 years old already. Before that time, of course, he did work, he developed as an artist, but he was kind of the odd man out, starting right after the war, forming himself as an artist, working with several artists and taking lessons with them. At that time, being determined to do figurative art, it was difficult. Everybody was doing abstract painting, like here in the 1950s. So it was only in the 1960s when he then kind of rejoined the artistic mainstream. And he did that through his typical, let's say, traditionalist approach. Franz was a traditionalist. He was interested and studied art history, and then also through studying the methods that old masters had been using, Dürer, Caravaggio, Vermeer. As you know, Dürer had this famous screen which he used for drawing, which then would create a grid from which he would do his drawings. Caravaggio, Vermeer, they worked with the camera oscura, which projected an image upside down onto a sheet, which then they took as the base for their works. So in 1969, he had the idea, why not use photography? So as a contemporary technique in order to achieve what these painters had been doing and had been working on centuries before. So he started experimenting. He formed himself as a photographer. He worked with Woodcut, who was a major Swiss photographer, also an artist, in order to be able to take real first-class images. So the departing point, and this is important, he's a painter who starts with photography, as many have been in the second half of the 20th century. He used photography, he then did slides. He projected those slides onto the wall and then tried to find out how to use this as a base. You can even see in that little historical footage that we have on the screen at the entrance, you see how that works. He had like a foot switch where you could turn off and on the projection. Because of course, it's not as easy as you think, just painting a projected slide. Because of course, you're working under the light of the slide, which is colored light. So the colors you have in your hand changes color. So you really have to develop a technique. And basically, what the way and the development was that he would use the screen, the photograph, as the base for the drawing. So, as we know, we have three elements of painting. We have drawing, we have modeling, and we have color. So the drawing is being formed by the photograph that he uses as a departing point. In that way, he started in the 1970s working on a series. The subject matter, as you can already see here, was then and will be throughout his career again very traditional. The old, ancient, traditional genres of European painting, landscape, the nude, portraits. That's basically what he did. There were group portraits, there's half-figure portraits, there's head portraits, but he would never really divert from this basic approach to what he wanted to do. What did he want to do? He wanted to show us the world as he saw it. So he found that photography could be a point of departure, but photography was not the end. That's perhaps the key idea. When you look at a large-scale photograph, as we know that from Thomas Struth or Gursky, you will find that the photograph, it captures and freezes one moment, and it also freezes, of course, the focus. So if you approach, if you get closer, it will not change. This is different here. You will find when you look at this large landscape, which is just a creek, the surface of a creek, which runs nearby the country house where Franz Gertsch lived. You will see how the visual appearance changes with every step you take, with every angle you take approaching the image. We get a much more lively image than a photograph could ever provide. So the 1970s is characterized by a series of group portraits, mainly of young people. So he gets acquainted with a group of young artists around an artist named Luciano Castelli. Francis being fascinated by the way these young people behave. And they dress up differently, they behave differently, they style themselves differently in the way of the early 1970s, like glam rockers used to do, like David Bowie or people at that time. So they put on makeup, they put on fancy dresses, and he was just fascinated by the way that these this new generation liked to represent himself. So they become the main subject matter for a series of years. And here in the show, to represent this period, we have the final point of this development, which is a series of 5 portraits he did of Patti Smith in the late 1970s. He was not acquainted with Patti Smith. He walked by past a record store in Bern, and he saw in the window her record horses with the famous photograph, and he was immediately fascinated by this person. So he goes inside, he purchases the record, and then he learns that she was supposed to do a performance at the gallery in Cologne. That's what made him decide to travel there. He's there in the audience, and he takes a series of images of Patti Smith. He even annoys her famously because he's walking around the stage and disturbing her poetry reading, so she was not very happy. There's even one portrait where she really hisses and shouts at him. Later they reconcile, and as you can see in the video also at the entrance, she then traveled to his home. She was there in the museum in Bern, and the cycle of the 5 Patti portraits was presented for the first time. These are acrylic paintings, acrylic on canvas, like let's say the technique of the projection of the slide. He developed also, of course, the technique of making these paintings. he used a very special type of canvas, which he found in the paintings of Maurice Lewis. So he came to New York and tried to get the very canvas that Maurice Lewis had been using, because he knew that this was exactly what he needed to give the desired effect. In 1980, it all comes to a stop. He writes to a halt. He thinks, I can get no further with this way of doing art. So in the 5 next years, there's almost no output, but there is a big, major development. Because he decides to learn a new technique, and to create a new technique of image making, which would perhaps be able to take him even farther away from photography, even closer to reproducing in images what he saw, what his visual experience was. So he turns to the woodcut, which is kind of paradox. As you know, woodcuts are not usually used for very realistic renderings. The woodcut is a kind of rough technique ever since the Renaissance, used to give bold outlines, black and white, harsh, big contrasts, but you would not use woodcuts in order to give subtle modulations of light and dark. He approaches a carpenter in the village where he lives. First, he has to create the plates. So find the wood, lime wood turned out to be the right choice. He had his huge plates made. He then covers them with a layer of color, just monochrome, in order to give relief and contrast. He had his tools made, special chisels, knives, which he then used to carve out of the wood each line point. So you have to imagine he's there working on these plates, piece by piece, day by day, painstakingly, long and complicated process. Also a process which allows no mistakes. You can't go back. What you've carved out is out. There's no way to correct. And a major piece, this is the largest type, the triptych Schwarzwasser. This is 2 years of his life that he did a small piece every day, patiently carving out the image. So once the plate and the image is carved out, the print has to be made. What paper to use? He soon found that custom-made paper, which was available on the market, was of no use. So he traveled to Japan and he worked with a paper maker there in Japan in order to have the right paper produced that would have the right thickness and the right texture in order to absorb just enough of the paint, of the color, but not absorb too much. This, of course, was very important, as was the production of the very color. So also he could not be using prefabricated colors. So he produced the colors in collaboration also with professionals, himself starting from grinding pigments, trying to find the right solution there, which would just give the right amount of fluidity and thickness in order to then make the print. The color is then being rubbed in, really, virtually, literally, into the wooden plate by hand. A group of people stand around for hours and hours. They grind the color deep into the plate. It was important to find the right moment also when to print, the moment when the color is still wet enough, but it's also dry enough, of course. Then, when that moment has come, the plate is flat on the table, the paper gets applied, and then the printing starts. And also the printing is a hand process. There's a group of people that he trusted, that he worked with. They stand around, play, and they rub in the colors for hours and hours with glass bowls that he had produced. His glass was so at the right quality in order not to hurt, but to be able to give enough pressure in order to really press in the color. So the big surprise came after hours of rubbing in this color, when everybody was tired, lifting off the paper, if it worked. And many did not work, we have to say. There are some where there are patches where there was no color, there were patches where there was too much color. So all of this had to be developed in collaboration with this team over the years in order to produce these prints. They are not print in a traditional sense. There are editions, but each print is different. So he would only do one per color. So there is this same piece of landscape, which is also landscape just nearby his house. So you can see it was not about finding exotic and spectacular subject matter. He really wanted to do the everyday. It was about rendering visual experience in an artwork. So there's a red one of this, there's a green one of this, there's a blue one of this, and he would do several types of editions, some smaller, some larger, but always just doing individually. There are also some prints which you work with several plates and several colors, like the one in the back, which historically is the first, chronologically, a portrait also of a country girl, which was a friend of his daughter's, which he asked to sit for him, Natasha, and then from these photographs he then produced these portraits. Still at this time experiment with various colors, not just with single color woodcuts. Through the work with the woodcuts, he also developed a new approach to painting. So at a certain point he goes back to painting, and we have one important piece of the later years, the big triptych Guadeloupe, which again are two landscapes and a nude, which then connect into a triptych. Also here, now we no longer have the acrylic colors like the 70s portraits, but these are also handmade colors that he produced over himself, again with his special canvas. And here again, it was a process of really rubbing in the color into the canvas in order to create this light and into this effect. I recommend you also to, the space is almost a bit too small for this, because the full experience you get when you approach it from very far and you get closer, and like with the woodcuts, you will see how our visual experience permanently changes as it does when you experience nature. The photograph is an old one he had taken of his wife when they were on a trip to the Caribbean 20 or so years earlier. So it's like a certain homage, it's like Eve, it's an eternal female, but it's also a very personal work dedicated to his lifelong companion, Maria, who is seen here in the midst of this tropical landscape, which corresponds with the mid-European landscapes that were the main subject matter of his earlier experience. So we are here roughly in 2012, 2013, and for the last decade of his life, he continues working in both media, both woodcuts and painting, also often going back and forth, using one motif, one image, doing them both as a woodcut and as a painting. Like this Maria, the middle piece here of the triptych, he also did this as a woodcut, like the left one, the left panel, as well. So Franz Gertsch first came to a larger audience first got familiar with him in the context of a show, Documenta, in 1972. So in 1972, there was one section, one part, one chapter of Documenta was dedicated to the then contemporary new hyperrealism. There were many American painters, Chuck Close was among them, others, and Franz Gertsch was kind of grouped with them. He never quite liked that association. He never felt that he was really understood when people thought that his final goal was to achieve the effect that a photograph does give us. Because as you can see in the show, and as I tried to explain, it's really much more of parting from the photograph, going through the photograph, and going beyond the photograph in order to create visual experiences which photography cannot provide. This may help as a short introduction. Happy if you have questions to tell you more